It all started with a whisper, soft, small, and almost too quiet to catch. One day, Meghan's mother, Doria, leaned in and asked a question that froze the entire room. "What are Archie and Lilibet like?" "I've never really seen them." That single sentence shook everyone. A grandmother is supposed to know everything: the first laugh, the messy hands, the birthday candles, the tiny footsteps running around the house. But Doria didn't. Not because she forgot, but because she said she had never truly been around them. And that opened a door no one ever expected to look behind. If the grandmother, the woman closest to Meghan, barely saw the children, then who did? And why did she sound almost afraid to ask? That whisper was the first sign that something in Meghan and Harry's picture-perfect family didn't match the glossy version shown to the world. And once that whisper slipped out, more truths began to surface. Truths from someone who had lived inside the house far longer than anyone else. Someone who saw everything except the one thing she should have seen. When the maid finally spoke, her voice was disguised. Not for fame, she wanted none, but because she couldn't carry the weight of silence anymore. She had worked inside Meghan and Harry's home for months. 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. She cleaned every room, walked every hallway, watched life unfold around her. And yet, she said the house never felt alive. It didn't sound like a home with children. It didn't look like a place where a family lived. Instead, she said it felt like a movie set, perfectly arranged for the cameras, and frozen once the filming stopped. Every room in the house looked perfect. Too perfect. Nothing was out of place, no clutter, no chaos, none of the everyday mess that real life creates. The maid didn't speak like someone trying to stir drama. Her voice wasn't angry or excited, it was calm, steady, almost exhausted, like someone who wished she hadn't noticed what she did. And the most unsettling part, according to her, wasn't what she saw. It was everything she never saw. A home with children has a certain energy. Even the quietest kids leave little clues behind: tiny shoes by the door, crayons under the table, a toy in the wrong room, a random giggle, a sudden cry, footsteps running across the floor. But in Meghan and Harry's mansion? None of that. The maid claimed she never saw toys, never saw children's clothes, never heard laughter, never heard crying, not even a forgotten sock hiding under a chair. Nothing. She said she would walk into a room and pause, waiting to hear something, anything, that would prove kids live there. But all she ever felt was silence. A deep, heavy silence that made her stomach tighten. One afternoon, she quietly asked another staff member, "Do you ever see the children?" The woman simply shook her head and whispered, "Never." And this wasn't after a week, not after a month, but after months of working from sunrise to sunset. Outside the gates, the world believed Archie and Lilibet were growing up inside that home. But the people who were actually inside, the ones cooking, cleaning, opening doors, closing curtains, said they couldn't find a single trace of children anywhere. And that eerie emptiness made the maid start asking herself the same haunting question Doria had once whispered. Where were the children? The more the maid replayed her memories, the stranger everything began to feel. In a normal home, a mother moves with instinct, checking on the kids, picking up toys, calling their names, fixing their little messes. But Meghan's presence in the house never looked like that. Not once. In the beginning, she would appear 3 or 4 times a week, but even then, she never stayed long. She would sweep through the front door like someone stepping onto a set, walking fast, talking fast, always looking like she was in a hurry. And she was never alone. Sometimes Marcus Anderson trailed behind her, sometimes a blonde assistant, and sometimes an entire camera crew carrying lights, microphones, and equipment. To the staff, it didn't feel like a family home anymore. It felt like a production set, a place where scenes were created, not lived. As the weeks passed, Meghan's visits dropped to just 2 days a week. Quiet whispers began to circle among the staff. They said she didn't come across like a mother returning home, but like a guest checking in on a project she wasn't really part of. The maid noticed something even more unsettling. Meghan's movements looked rehearsed. She spoke only when cameras were present. She glanced at her reflection more than she looked at the rooms. And she walked through the house like she was performing a character instead of simply being herself. Slowly, everything started to make sense. The house didn't feel like it belonged to a family. It felt like it belonged to an image, and that image was starting to crack. Then came the moment the maid says she will remember forever. One late evening, she was wiping down the kitchen counters when she heard shouting erupt from the hallway. Sharp, angry, echoing through the quiet house. The kind of shouting that stops you in your tracks without even meaning to. She stepped forward, not to snoop, but because the voices were impossible to ignore. The maid recognized Lena's voice first. Sharp, furious. But what froze her blood was the voice of Adrian. He didn't sound angry, not even stern. He sounded desperate, pleading for something she couldn't yet see. When the maid stepped closer to the hallway door, the scene in front of her made her heart sink. Adrian was holding Lena's arms, trying to keep her from hitting him. He wasn't yelling back. He wasn't fighting. He just looked defeated. His face was red not with rage, but with humiliation and exhaustion. And standing nearby was Mark, their close associate, pulling Lena away as Adrian stumbled into a chair, breath shaking. Then came the silence. A cold, heavy silence that felt different from the others, darker, heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. The maid quietly stepped in and handed Adrian a glass of water. He whispered a soft, "Thank you." And in that single moment, she said everything became clear: the weight he carried, the pressure behind his eyes, the sadness of a man who once stood confident before the world, but now seemed lost inside the walls of his own home. After that night, everything changed. Smiles became rare. Laughter disappeared. The tension in the house grew thicker every day, stretching like a rope pulled too tight. But the part of her story that shocked everyone the most wasn't the argument. It was what came next. The maid claimed she had never once seen Lena pregnant. Not before baby A, not before baby L, not during any of the months she worked there. No growing belly. No morning sickness. None of the small everyday signs that come with expecting a child. At first, she thought maybe she'd simply missed it. But she worked 12-hour shifts 5 days a week. Impossible to overlook something that big, yet somehow, she never saw it at all. The maid had seen Lena almost every day before the visits slowed down. Up close, walking past her in hallways, brushing by the counters, adjusting her clothes, fixing her hair in reflections. And still, no signs of pregnancy. Not even the smallest change. When she quietly shared her concerns with the other staff, they admitted the same thing. They had never noticed anything either. But outside the mansion gates, it was a completely different world. Magazines displayed glowing photos, elegant dresses, perfect smiles, hands resting on a perfectly round belly. A flawless image. But inside the home, the image never matched the reality the staff witnessed. The maid said her voice didn't shake when she shared this part. She wasn't trying to create a scandal. She wasn't adding drama. She was simply describing what she saw, or rather, what she didn't see. And to her, that was the biggest truth of all. Something about those pregnancies just didn't add up. Months after leaving the job, the maid sat alone in her tiny apartment one evening when a documentary about Lena and Adrian aired. She wasn't sure what to expect from the maybe familiar rooms she had cleaned 1,000 times, maybe the hallways she could navigate blindfolded. But as the documentary played, something strange happened. The house on screen didn't match the house she worked in. The angles were different. The rooms had different shapes. Even the garden, the one she walked past every morning, didn't look the same. The documentary showed Lena smiling in soft sunlight, cradling a baby bump the maid swore she never saw. There were scenes of Lena and Adrian playing with their children in a bright garden. Chickens clucked nearby, laughter floated through the air, everything looked warm and alive. But to the maid, it felt foreign, unfamiliar. Almost like she was watching actors recreate a life that wasn't real. She had cleaned the real garden. She had swept the dirt beneath the real chicken coop. She had opened those same. Maybe the documentary was filmed in a rental house. Maybe a studio. Maybe a redesigned set. But it definitely wasn't the home she knew. That realization hit the maid like a stone. If the footage wasn't filmed where they actually lived, what else wasn't real? That question stayed with her long after the credits faded. She had always known Lena and Adrian were private people. But the longer she worked there, the more she felt the house wasn't built to protect a family, it was built to protect secrets. Every morning, before any staff could step through the gate, they had to surrender their phones. Security guards would check their bags, pat down their pockets, and scan them for anything that could record or capture even a single image. Inside the mansion, something strange always stood out. The cameras didn't watch the children. They watched the staff. Silence followed them instead of laughter. And the rules? Unbreakable. No photos. No notes. No private conversations. No whispers to anyone outside those walls. She remembered one afternoon when a new worker simply took a photo of the flowers outside the entrance, just a harmless, innocent picture. Within minutes, security stormed in, grabbed her phone, demanded the unlock code, and deleted the image. The air turned ice cold. From that day on, the maid understood something important. This wasn't privacy. This was control. The home didn't feel warm. It didn't feel safe. It felt like a fortress, a place where truth was locked away behind thick walls and silence was the only language allowed. And the more the staff were forced to hide, the clearer it became that something behind those walls wasn't meant to be seen. As time passed, the maid realized she wasn't alone in her unease. Quiet conversations began happening in hallways, in the laundry room, beside the kitchen door. Never loud enough for the cameras to pick up, but whispered with a growing fear. Workers who had been there far longer than she had admitted the same thing. One afternoon, the woman who handled the laundry leaned closer and whispered, "There are no children's clothes to wash. No tiny shirts. No pajamas. No bibs. Nothing." Another worker who handled the grocery deliveries admitted quietly, "I've never once bought baby food." Even the security guards, normally stone-faced, unblinking, impossible to read, sometimes exchanged looks that said more than any sentence could. None of these people were dramatic. None of them were troublemakers. They didn't gossip. They didn't exaggerate. They were simply describing what their days looked like. And strangely, all their days looked exactly the same. The staff inside Lena and Adrian's home lived through an emptiness the world outside would never believe. They walked through rooms where silence lived instead of childhood. They watched stillness settle in places where little voices should have echoed. And as more workers quietly admitted the same thing, one truth became impossible to ignore. Something was missing. Something important. Something the outside world believed was right there behind the gates, but no one inside the home could find a single trace of it. And this leads to the moment where every thread of the story finally tightens. A grandmother whispering she has never truly seen the children. A maid who lived inside the home for months and saw a flawless, polished set, but not a family. Rooms with no toys. Hallways with no giggles. Days with no tiny footsteps pattering across the floors. A house built for perfection, but empty of the one thing everyone believed was there. In the mansion where everything looked perfect from the outside, the people working inside began to notice something strange. A laundry woman whispered, "I never wash any children's clothes." A grocery worker admitted, "I've never bought baby food." Even the security guards, always silent, shared uneasy looks from time to time. No one was trying to gossip. No one was stirring drama. They were simply talking about what their days looked like, and strangely, those days all looked the same. Inside the home, there was an emptiness no one outside could see. Where there should have been toys, laughter, or even tiny footsteps, there was nothing. Room after room felt like a beautiful set with no story happening inside it. A grandmother who whispered that she had barely seen the children. A maid who worked there for months, but never heard a single giggle in the halls. A house that looked perfect, but felt hollow. Then came the bigger questions. A mother who visited rarely, always surrounded by cameras. A father who seemed to grow heavier and sadder each week. A documentary filmed in rooms the staff never recognized. Piece by piece, the picture changed. Not into a rumor, into a mystery. Because if the people living and working inside the home never saw the children, then where were they? The world saw glowing interviews, polished photos, and cinematic moments. But the people inside saw something else: silence. Emptiness. A story built so perfectly that even the truth struggled to break through. And until someone answers the question everyone inside whispered, the silence will only grow louder. Because no matter how beautiful the illusion is, the truth always finds a way to appear.